Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us here at the Osterville Village Library. My name is Amy Wolf. I'm the Programming Director here at the OVL. Tonight, we are excited to have John Wilson joining us by Zoom due to a last-minute unavoidable circumstance. We are, however, very fortunate to have with us John's wife, Leslie, who also co-wrote the book, and daughter, Mamie, who are here with us in person to share the family's ordeal as they went through what can only be described as their worst nightmare. Welcome to John Wilson's book launch of Varsity Blues, The Scandal Within the Scandal.
Thank you all for coming. I do want to say that all the proceeds from the book sales go to 3 nonprofit organizations. Autism Speaks, that John and I were very active on, and South Peninsula Water Polo Association that our son belonged to, and NACDL, Foundation for Criminal Justice, for people who cannot afford attorneys. So thank you for coming tonight.
Do you want me to start with the video?
Yes, please.
About 98% of all cases the government brings ends up in conviction. Prosecutors know how to stoke the press to build their case.
Today's announcement from federal prosecutors was a shocker.
They write what sells newspapers or gets them
The
viewers.
story is a bombshell.
You can put a bunch of wealthy and famous people in the court system. It gets great publicity. And that's how some prosecutors build their careers.
Massive college admission scandal.
Operation Varsity Blues.
Some of the parents are famous.
Cheating on standardized tests, presenting students as top athletes in sports they never even played.
We want to take you to the great news for a change.
The youngest ever to swim the treacherous waters from Alcatraz to San Francisco.
Welcome, Johnny Wilson, to the show.
Yeah, March 12th, 2019, my version of the American Dream came crashing down and turned into a nightmare.
This morning, 50 people arrested.
I was arrested for honest services fraud by 2 FBI agents getting off a plane in Houston. And I thought it was a case of mistaken identity.
When I got the phone call, I assumed they had arrested the wrong person, not my John Wilson.
I was then taken to a federal prison, stripped, hosed down, given a jumpsuit. The guards told me to watch my back because as an old white guy, the other prisoners would assume I was a pedophile. And I could be stabbed with a shiv.
John was the one person who lived in Massachusetts. So John becomes the anchor that pulls the other 50 parents into Massachusetts.
Boston prosecutors knew there would be media attention for this high-profile case. They wanted some of that for their own careers. 180 years of potential prison time, all to try to pressure me to plead guilty. Perhaps the most frightening part of this story is the fact that the government had overwhelming evidence from day one that I was innocent the entire time. Their hardball tactics were so extreme that I would be shocked and wouldn't believe them myself if I hadn't experienced them personally.
Because if he went to trial, he was the best person to say the government doesn't have a case.
32 parents have pleaded guilty.
Singer pled guilty today, but
That's dangerous for everyone else involved.
What they didn't count on was me fighting back. And there was no way in hell I would ever confess to crimes I didn't commit.
The scale of this scam just astonishing.
Once you're accused, 95% of the people assume you're guilty.
Rich people cheat and their kids are fucking stupid.
I want to correct the record for children. I want the world to know that my children were innocent. They were highly qualified on their own merits, and I will spend every last breath defending them.
The first parents to face trial in the Varsity Blues college admission
I
scandal.
remember walking in the first day into the courtroom, and your whole family's future is on the line. I'd have to leave and cry in the bathroom, knowing they are tearing up our life.
I could have taken the easy path and pleaded guilty at any time, but my family and I drew a line in the sand. I knew that fighting for truth, we could all hold our heads high.
This case was the best example of prosecutors thinking from the beginning, how do we muscle these defendants into pleading guilty so nobody will ever look at what we did under the light of day?
It's been 5 years of emotional, physical, and financial hell. I want the world to hear my untold story, so something like this never happens to anyone else.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. clearly the biggest issue for Leslie and myself and our family was how far would we go to fight these false charges? This question is a very profound one that I hope no one in this room ever has to answer. How far would you go to defend your family's honor if you were falsely accused of a crime, not by a local prosecutor, but by federal prosecutors who have unlimited resources and have a 99.6% conviction rate? That's the latest conviction rate as of the last decade. You're fighting a Goliath with basically unlimited resources to defend your honor. It destroys everything you've ever earned, takes all of your financial resources. It's a nightmare from an emotional roller coaster point of view. It's a nightmare from a public relations point of view and from a family point of view. But the consequences of not fighting and confessing to a crime you didn't commit, we felt were far worse. And so for us, this question became not just a rhetorical, theoretical question, but a very, very real decision. And I'll talk through more about that and how we came to our decision and how painful it's been having to fight these officials in this process. If you could flip to the next slide, please.
Uh-oh. Sorry.
Don't do the video, just freeze it there.
Okay.
Clearly, when the Varsity Blues scandal was first announced in 2019, there were a lot of bad actors in this case. Singer had, that's the ringleader at the center of this scam, he had 3,000 parent clients. Only 30 were charged. That wasn't in the publicity of the press very much, but there were 30 very bad actors who all pled guilty. People who cheated on tests, people who bribed coaches knowingly, people who put together false profiles for their children who didn't even play the sport to get their unqualified children accepted into top universities. And it created this national sensation of basically class warfare and showing entitled parents gone wild, where they were doing everything and anything to get their unqualified kids into top colleges. And that's a horrific story, and I don't condone any of those actions at any time. But that was their story. It wasn't our story. So to tell our story, we wrote this book. If you go to the next slide. Unlike what was portrayed in the Netflix film and by the government, I didn't grow up with a silver spoon. We weren't an elitist family. I grew up in public housing, in the housing projects called Bowles Park in Hartford, Connecticut. I was born in a family with a single mother. We had 6 children total. 4 of them were together with a single mother. This is a picture of my brother, my older brother, and myself when I was 3 years old in those housing projects. I know the value of hard work. I know what it's like to grow up poor, and I know how much education can change your life. The combination of hard work and education fundamentally changed my life. Not only did I grow up in the projects on welfare, I picked tobacco for 6 days a week, 10-hour days out in the fields from the ages of 12 to 16 to help my family make ends meet. So unlike what the media portrayed, we did not grow up in an elitist situation at all. Go to the next slide, please. In fact, our children were all extremely gifted. And I know every parent's going to say that, but I'll share some of the facts that'll prove that my son, for example, was a qualified Division I athlete who did many, many things and trained for over a decade for 500 to 750 hours a year. Go back, please. In swimming and water polo. When he was 9 years old, he had a world record swimming from Alcatraz. It got him national media attention. Go to the next slide, please. He was on the Oprah show. He got commendation letters from the White House. He was in Vanity Fair, their Best of the Best edition in 2005 with a 2 full-page spread. He got accolades and was on TV shows from the Good Morning America and Today Show to BBC and so forth. He was a real athlete who dedicated himself for literally 500 to 700 hours a year from the age of 6 onward. This is what he did at 9. Go to the next slide, please. He competed nationally and internationally in water polo and swimming. This left picture is a picture the government had, as well as Netflix, of my son winning the Northern Bay Area championships in the butterfly in high school his junior year. That's not a picture of a fake athlete. That's our son, who'd been training for 7,000 hours by the time this picture was taken in the pool. On the right-hand side, he was playing for Stanford Club for 7 years in water polo, as well as his school teams. His team won the National Junior Olympics tournament when he was a starter in 2012. He achieved many trophies and accolades over the years, just shown here, some of the trophies and accolades over the years on his bureau. The government had all this information. When they told the media, and they told the media to this day, just 2 months ago, that my son, our son, was an alleged athlete who wasn't qualified. They said this person with a national championship team on water polo, with a world record, who was winning championships, competing nationally, internationally, who was invited to the U.S. Olympic team development program twice, was an alleged athlete. And they had all of this information, and we know they had it because they blocked all of this information piece by piece during my trial 660 times. None of this we're showing you was allowed into my trial. Go to the next slide, please. His coach in high school and junior and middle school, Jack Bowen, trained my son for 7 years. He's the winningest coach in America with over 500 team wins in water polo. He was a 2-time All-American water polo NCAA MVP while at Stanford, the only person to be a 2-time MVP. He was an alternate goalie on the U.S. 2006 water polo team. He coached my son for 7 years. He knew my son better than anyone. He recommended my son to the USC team. He called the USC coaches and recommended him. Go to the next slide, please. This is what Jack said. Here's a text from Jack. I'll just read the last part of that. Without a doubt, Johnny was legitimately in the group of D1 college recruitable athletes. He told that to the government as well. Keep going. My son joined the USC team. Here's a picture of the 2014 team with my son. And notably, there's a coach just to his left who testified, we'll come back to this, that my son wasn't on the team. He's just showed up the first day. This picture was taken 3 weeks into the season, by the way. Go to the next slide. My son's swim time. This is a swim time from one of the swim meets hosted by USA Swimming. This was one of the championship meets. He was 22 seconds or so, 22.7 seconds in this meet. His actual best time was a little less than this, was about 22 even. The email below shows the coach of the USC team talking about his fastest players. His fastest players were around 22 seconds. Our son was one of the fastest players in the country in water polo. He was one of the fastest players on the national championship USC team. This proved it. Unfortunately, this swim time was not allowed into our trial. Our son's high school coach, who testified on the stand about our son, was not allowed by the judge or the prosecutor to share our son's actual swim time. They said that was a swim time for the swim team, not the water polo team, and was not admissible because he didn't witness it firsthand, even though this is an official record of USA Swimming. That's how outrageous this trial was. And we'll come back to how they excluded 98.3% of our evidence. 660 times the prosecutors excluded our evidence with a judge who they handpicked, who was extremely favorable to them, who blocked all of our evidence over 98% of the time. Go to the next slide, please. This is a profile that we actually did, which was verified on the right, versus what was included in the USC application. This was the core of the government's case. The left profile was something I had actually never read. It was sent to me in an email as an attachment from a random person I'd never heard of. And so I didn't open it. I was trained at work not to open things like this. They could be phishing. So this email was attached as a FYI, it said. That's it, from a random person I didn't know. But you'll notice on the profile, it had my incorrect address. Why would I put an incorrect address on a profile for my son? And you'll have to understand that during this time, the entire family and my job was in Europe. I was working in Europe. My son stayed in California to finish his last year of high school. He was staying with a close family friend. And this fellow, Rick Singer, offered to help me and help my son complete his profile. And not complete his profile, but to complete his applications. So he helped my son with his applications. And this profile, this one-page profile, was included in those applications. I didn't read it. Another example of proof why I didn't read this profile on the left included my son's worst SAT score, an 82 percentile score, instead of his best ACT score, which is a 93 percentile score. If I was knowingly trying to put false information into the profile, why would I put in his worst test score instead of his best test score? And an 11-point difference applying to top schools like USC is enormous. Clearly, I didn't even read this profile. I didn't look at it. I would have put his best test score. And I paid attention to the test scores because I looked at the percentiles and how they stacked up. I didn't want my kids going to schools where they wouldn't be able to be successful. And so I looked at their test scores and saw how that was comparing to the existing students at that school. Some other examples, there was the wrong coach. Why would I put in the wrong coach for my son? The team was missing as well. They had one of his coaches correct. One of his teams was missing. He played on 3 teams year round. His world record was missing. The only other fact that the government had in this profile that was wrong, there were some awards that were small awards. Was he second national versus first national team? Those kinds of things. His swim time was changed by 7.8%. That was the federal crime they said that this all rested on. And the way they got away with that is they blocked my son's actual swim time. So they said the swim time was false. We weren't allowed to say by how much it was false. I didn't put the false swim time in. Rick Singer did. He exaggerated my son's swim time by less than 8%. And that was the felony they said was worth charging me with 180 years of prison time. Go to the next slide, please. My daughters were also highly qualified. My daughter there, Mamie, who's with you, got a perfect score on the ACT, a perfect 36. To put that into perspective, fewer than 5,000 students worldwide out of 1.8 million get a perfect score. And she didn't cheat. She wasn't accused of cheating. And her twin sister, Courtney, got a 99 percentile. They were smart kids. We were living in Amsterdam at the time. They were both working hard and achieving great things in the classroom and outside. And this is an example of the World Scholars Cup competition in Amsterdam that they did. And they're each winning multiple categories: first place, second place, third place, honorable mention. They worked hard and studied hard and did extremely well. They were very talented. Did the government allow any of this in? No. My daughter's perfect ACT test score was not allowed into my trial. The judge said it was irrelevant hearsay. Our lawyers were shocked. They said, how can this be? And the judge said, take it up on appeal. Perfect ACT test scores in a college admissions trial, not allowed to be shared with the jury. It was shocking beyond belief. Go to the next slide. Also, all the money we gave to USC. We didn't bribe a coach. We gave money to USC, and it was given in a cashier's check through Rick Singer's organization. The cashier's check was right there. USC men's water polo. It wasn't made out to any coach. And it says memo, Wilson family on it. We also checked with the IRS website. It's certified that the Key Foundation, which Rick Singer ran, was certified, and that you could rely on this website to make your contributions tax deductible. And we got a thank you letter from USC for our donation. And they kept our money to this day. And yet the government claimed this was a bribe. And for the first time in history, and the only time, it's never been done afterwards, the judge defined for the jury in the instructions that giving a donation to a college can be considered a bribe to a coach, even if the coach doesn't get any of the money. It's the first time in history that the victim of a bribe, in this case, USC, is the one who got the money, who kept the money, and gave a receipt for it. It's absolutely outrageous. It's one of the other reasons that my convictions were overturned unanimously. This is just bad law and bad judicial decision-making. To give money to a school to get a tiebreaker boost, is what the school said. We went to the school and met with them, is not illegal. It may arguably be unfair, but when you have highly qualified children and you make a donation and the school solicits the donation from us and said, if you do that, we'll give you a boost in the admissions process, is something that's been going on for generations. It wasn't a bribe, and yet the judge defined it as a bribe for the jury. Go to the next slide, please. So you ask yourself, why did they do this? Why did they charge me? And then why did they railroad me through this trial? If you step back, we were introduced to Rick Singer by our advisors at Goldman Sachs. We had worked with Goldman Sachs since the 1990s. And in 2012, this advisor we worked with for 15 years called me up and said, your son's now entering high school. He's now a freshman. We've got a great resource we recommend for you. A guy named Rick Singer, who runs this organization and this foundation to help kids and families navigate the college admissions process. He has lots of Goldman clients. He has everybody who's who in Silicon Valley. He has Steve Jobs as a client, John Doerr, Joe Montana, all these clients. He had 3,000 clients. And he said, this guy can really help you as a family figure out what's going on. So we hired him. And he provided legitimate services to us. By the way, 99% of Singer's clients were innocent, wholesome people like we were. He had 3,000 clients. Only 33 were charged, right? So 1% of his clients committed these crimes the government committed to. 99% were innocent like we were. Of the 3,000 clients Singer had, only one was based in Massachusetts. We hired him when we lived in California, and I moved back to Massachusetts after we finished our assignment in Europe. So I was the only person who lived in Massachusetts, and I became the venue hook for the Boston-based prosecutors. The Boston-based prosecutors uncovered this case from a random tip from somebody in Connecticut. And when they saw that the Singer client base included Hollywood movie stars, Felicity Huffman, Lori Loughlin, and others, they knew this would be a high-profile case that could make or break a prosecutor's career. And so they really want to do everything they could to justify bringing all of the trials from California to Boston. Under federal law, all the people in California had a right to have a trial in Boston, a right to a trial in California. You have a right to take a trial wherever you live or wherever the crime was committed. All those people committed their crimes in California. They worked with USC, with Singer in California. They lived in California. None of them should have ever been brought to Boston. The only way this trial could happen in Boston was the Boston prosecutors had to do two things. They had to claim a false national conspiracy that all these parents colluded together with Singer. I never met Felicity Huffman or Lori Loughlin in my life. Any of these people, we didn't collude. In fact, we were competing, arguably. That's what the appeals court concluded as well. We were competing for slots. We weren't colluding with Singer. And then two, they needed to have one person in that conspiracy that lived in the jurisdiction that they had, which was Massachusetts. And that's why they charged me. I spoke with this person. There was a person who worked in the U.S. Department in Boston, in the U.S. Attorney's Office, was an AUSA, who did an interview with Law 360 in July 2022, after the trials were over. And he said that Boston positioned itself to get those big cases and win any turf battles to keep them versus LA in this case. I spoke to him after his article came out and after my trials were over. And I asked him to verify he made this quote. He said, yes, he did. And when he was asked about this, when he was quoted this way, the Boston office called him up and reprimanded him. Said, why are you saying that? You're hurting our reputation. He said, it's the truth. Subsequently, I tried to hire him to do my FOIA requests, some government information requests. He asked for clearance 7 years later from the federal government to do that. His statute of limitations are already up. They threatened him just last month with criminal prosecutions if he talks to me. If they have nothing to hide, why are they threatening him with criminal prosecution for just talking to me about submitting a FOIA request, a Freedom of Information Act request? It's despicable what they did. They used me and my family as collateral damage to boost their own careers, to bring all these trials to Boston. Many people didn't ask, why are all these trials happening in Boston? Nobody's based in Boston except me. It was because they needed to create a false conspiracy and have one person in that false conspiracy in Massachusetts. It didn't matter the conspiracy was false, because once the trial starts, you have to go through a loss in the trial process and appeal your case. And the appellate judges said, there's no conspiracy here. But by then you've suffered 5 years of mental anguish, legal fees, and reputational harm. That's why the prosecutors targeted me and treated my family like collateral damage. Go to the next page. Once they charged me, they did everything they could to pressure me to plead guilty. It was outrageous. They stacked charges on me 5 times. The initial charges and then 4 superseding sets of charges. They ended up charging me with 9 felonies, more than twice what they charged the ringleader with, Rick Singer, more than 5 times the average of other parents, almost as much as Bernie Madoff, and more than Sam Bankman-Fried. Think about it. All they had was I donated for kids who were highly qualified, who didn't cheat on their tests, who actually joined and played on the USC team. I got a receipt for my money, and they charged me with 180 years of potential prison time to pressure me to plead guilty. And it was outrageous, their behavior. I'll share one story that's in the book that is still shocking to this day. When we were all entering our plea deals in Boston, Leslie and I were in the courthouse there in Boston, and the media sensation was crazy. The throngs of media were just terrible to walk through. They had Felicity Huffman and Lori Loughlin and all these people on TV, and just going through that was a horrific experience. So we entered the courthouse all together, and we all entered our pleas of not guilty. Everyone else had to leave right away because they had planes to catch back to California. Les and I were just driving back up to Boston, or back to the suburbs of Boston. We decided to wait for the media to die down. We waited for an hour, and the media started to die down. We tried to leave. We told our lawyer in the meantime, you don't need to stay here. We don't need to pay you for an hour to babysit us. You know, it's very expensive. So we told our lawyer to go home. We waited in the courthouse. Right there in the Moakley Federal Courthouse, when we were about to leave, Leslie went to the restroom. I was standing alone in the hallway. The prosecutor, the lead prosecutor, comes up to me in the hallway and approached me and says, you know, if you plead guilty now, I can cut your deal. I can have all of the money you were pledging to give that didn't give yet to Singer for future donations excluded from the calculations for your prison sentence. I said, what? I said, I'm not going to plead guilty. I didn't commit any crime here. And then I said to him, when Leslie started coming back, I said, besides, isn't it against the rules for you to be talking to me without my lawyer? And I'll never forget to the day I die, the look on his face, the smug look on his face, and what he said to me. He said, with this terrible grin, smirk really, who do you think makes the rules? I was in shock. I'd never broken a law or been arrested in my life. And here this federal prosecutor had the gall and the arrogance to tell me, who do you think makes the rules? It was just despicable. Go on to the next slide. What they did throughout the media process and throughout the trial was convict me in the court of public opinion and the court of law through guilt by association. This is Noel Francisco, the person who represented me from Jones Day, the former Solicitor General of the U.S., at the appeals court. And when he was quoted in the press as saying, Wilson was convicted not for what he did, but for what others did. And that's what the trial was all about. They blocked my evidence 98.3% of the time, and they showed 50 other people, 30 other parents and other coaches and test cheaters talking again and again about bribing coaches, about cheating on tests, and about creating fake profiles. So for example, in my trial, when you hear as a jury, 10 other people talk about bribing coaches. They did that again and again and again. And then you hear my recording with Rick Singer when he's being scripted by the FBI. He says, are you okay if we give a check to the coach? I say, yeah, just like we did at USC. You give a check to the coach. It was a check made out to USC. You give it to somebody. You don't just throw it in the water or tape it on the door. You give it to someone. And so that's what they did. They took my quotes out of context, but played them next to 30 other parents talking explicitly about bribing. And so that level of pollution is also unfair. There's a whole series of federal precedents about that. You can't convict somebody and smear somebody with other people's bad acts. That they did that over and over in the media and in my trial. Go to the next slide. The way they're able to get through this is they did something called judge shopping. I didn't even know you could do this. I knew there was venue shopping. They used me for the venue in Boston, but they're also able to judge shop. This is a letter that was done early on in 19 by 25 top lawyers from across the country arguing against what the government was doing. They basically took they spread the charges or the different defendants through the random assignment process across multiple judges in Boston. And then when they had one person who was assigned to the judge they preferred, who is someone who had 30 years of being highly supportive to the federal prosecutors, they amended that judge's docket by saying there's now a national conspiracy and we're putting everybody in that conspiracy on this judge's docket. So they were to get by with that trial process because they handpicked a judge through a process called judge shopping. And this is what the 25 attorneys said from 15 top law firms in the country. That's what they did. And this is an excerpt from their letter saying they're judge shopping. And not the appeals judge, but the chief magistrate and the judge himself said, no, it's not judge shopping. They had the judge rule that he wasn't being used as a judge shopping, victim, if you will. And he decided that he was going to be fair and independent. Let's go to the next slide. This is the impact what judge shopping can do. Even the appeals court said to the federal government, how can you argue that excluded evidence was not relevant? That's what the senior judge on the First Circuit Court of Appeals, Kermit Lipez, said. This is just one sample of the judge's rulings during our defense. 98.3% of the time he ruled against us. We made motions to object to the government. He only supported our objections 37% of the time. And there were hundreds and hundreds of pieces of evidence that were critical to my defense. For example, over 100 different examples of USC routinely giving admissions boosts to major donors' children. This was critical. The government admitted that if USC did this, then we didn't commit a crime. They not only blocked all this evidence, but the USC admissions person said they never give admissions help to donor families related to athletic admissions. They said they never do that. That's a crime. That's a bribe. That's what they said on the stand. And all the evidence we had that proved that they were lying was blocked. So it's called impeachment evidence. We weren't allowed to show any of that impeachment evidence. So the jury only heard the admissions person say, we never give admissions boosts to donor families, even though it was totally untrue. The other thing they did is block things like my son's actual swim time that proved, I mentioned earlier, his own high school coach couldn't bring his swim time that proved he's one of the fastest players. I mentioned earlier, my twin daughters, verified perfect and near perfect scores, not allowed in. My son's world record from Alcatraz, not allowed in. My will that pre-existed this by a decade, where I was committing millions to Harvard and RPI, and Singer knew that, and he convinced me to move part of that up. He convinced me and my wife to move part of our donations in our will up while my daughters were applying to help them with admissions, was not allowed into my trial. The written will was blocked. There was also videotapes of Singer talking to people at Starbucks headquarters and his emails to other clients saying the side door was legitimate. He always explained the side door to me as being legitimate. He said the back door was when you donate money for a building, and that would get you lifetime VIP status. It would help you get generations for your family's future generations into admission, get you help in the admissions process. If you made what he called a side door donation, that was a smaller donation, the back door might be tens of millions. The side door might be hundreds of thousands or $1 million. If you donated 100,000 or up to $1 million for different schools, you get a one-time VIP status. That's how he described it. They're both legal, both legitimate. And there were emails saying this, but they are all blocked from the jury being able to see. My own emails showing that I trusted Singer and believed him were also all excluded. This is how the trial ran. And the appeals court, thank God, said this is completely unfair. Next slide, please. There was also not just the appeals court, but an amicus brief or support brief written by 11 former U.S. attorneys. These are the top prosecutors across the country, appointed by both Democrat and Republican presidents. They were unpaid and unrelated to me, and they took the extraordinary step of publicly criticizing their former colleagues in Boston. Two of these people were from Massachusetts. And they wrote, John Wilson did not receive a fair trial. This almost never happens at the appellate level. It happens at the Supreme Court level sometimes, but it's extremely rare for federal prosecutors to stick their necks out for someone they don't even know. That's how unfair the process was, and criticize their former colleagues. Go to the next slide, please. And the appeals court overturned all of our fraud and conspiracy convictions unanimously. It was crystal clear. And then the federal government had the chance and the choice, do we retry this case with a new random judge, which is great. We'd have to have a new randomly assigned judge if they lose, like they did. And they decided not to. They said, no, we're going to drop those charges. There was one conviction they let remain, which was for filing a false statement in a tax return. It wasn't tax fraud and it wasn't tax evasion, because as the court record showed, I overpaid my taxes. This is the year 2014 by more than $100,000, believe it or not. I had the wrong address on my tax return. I was using my California address when I was living in Europe, and I had moved to Massachusetts full time. I didn't read my tax returns. I'm a little embarrassed to say that, but my returns were over 250 pages. I was paying taxes in Europe, taxes in the US, and taxes across multiple states in the US. Goldman Sachs and Price Waterhouse prepared my tax returns, and I signed them via DocuSign. That doesn't matter if there's one line item that's wrong in the tax return and you sign it by DocuSign or by hand, you're responsible for every line item in there. And the difference was $1,400, $1,425, because I used in that tax return the invoice from Singer's organization instead of the donation receipt from USC. And they said that was filing a false statement in a tax return. And that was a conviction to let stand. Makes no sense. The lawyer said to me, they threw a bone to the judge. They don't want to humiliate the judge totally by overturning all of the convictions like that, and throw a bone to the prosecutors as well to leave this minor tax charge. But it's a felony, and it profoundly affects my life. I still can't travel. I'm an international business person. I've worked and traveled to 95 countries. I'm not allowed to travel to the UK or Canada or Australia. As a convicted felon, even for $1,425, I am prohibited. That's how crazy the system is. Go to the next slide. The other thing that was done to us, and it's hard enough to fight one Goliath, the federal government, we had to fight 3 Goliaths in this process. The next big Goliath was Netflix, and we have a suit against them. They released what they called a documentary about this case before my trial. And when they announced they're going to have a documentary, we thought they might use me as part of the example group. And so my lawyer sent them a 550-page warning letter with all of the evidence in the public record showing that we were different than the other parents. Every family they showed in that film pled guilty, except me. So they had 10 families in their film that all pled guilty to bribery, cheating on tests, or cheating in fake athlete profiles, except me. And they knew that.
And show everybody. So just so it's clear, because I think it's a little tricky, this is our son, Johnny, who did the Alcatraz swim and went to USC for water polo and swimming. And this is what Netflix showed in the TV, claiming this is our son. It's despicable. Sorry, I had to jump in. Just.
Yep. I mean, I don't know who that kid is, but he's a wimpy little kid. Okay, that's fine. But you look at that versus what they had. They knew my son was a real athlete. I mean, my son was buff. And again, this is a proud dad, sure, but he's winning first place in championships. He's competing internationally in swimming. He's competing nationally in water polo, twice invited to the U.S. water polo Olympic program, joined the USC team, was one of the fastest players on the team, trained for 7,000 hours. And yet this is what Netflix depicts. The bottom right is a picture they showed of a kid being photoshopped when my voice is being shown during the series. The top photo is actually a different father, but it looks just like me in the Netflix. You can't see who the father is. The bottom photo is when my voice is talking to Rick Singer and they're photoshopping that little kid standing in the shallow end of the pool. And again, I would call him a wimpy little kid, whatever. I don't mean to be demeaning that kid. I don't know who he is, but that's a very far cry from what Netflix knew to be the facts for my son. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. What Netflix would do over and over again is take my words out of context. I'll give you two examples. I mentioned before about they had other parents who were bribing. They talk about me making a donation to a coach. I say to Rick Singer in the recorded calls, they spliced out of context. I say, so I give the money to you, not to the schools, right? I'm talking about how I wire logistics. He says, yes. And then Netflix cuts over to another parent bribing a coach. Well, it sounds like I'm bribing too. I'm not giving the money to the schools. Well, what they dropped out of my conversation, the very next sentence out of my mouth was, I say, and then you wire the money to the schools. So it clearly shows I wasn't trying to bribe anyone, but they deleted that second half of the soundbite. And so all I was trying to do was clarify, was I mailing the money or emailing the money to the schools, or was he emailing the money to the schools, right? It's a very innocent question. But when you splice it in half like that, it sounds terrible. And you play somebody else bribing right after my soundbite. And that's what you can do with the visual medium. You can do these kinds of tricks. You can take sound bites out of context and then splice again and again different parts of the story with different parents. They showed my picture or a guy playing me or my words 25 times in the first 23 minutes. So anybody watching this movie got the impression that I was bribing, I was cheating, I had a fake athlete, like all the other parents being depicted were, when I was actually never even accused of most of those things. All the accusations against me never said that. My son was a real athlete. He really joined the team. My money went to the school. We didn't create a fake profile. We never cheated on a test. And yet, when we did a focus group of the Netflix audience, every single person who watched that movie was convinced I was the worst parent because I was shown 25 times. The other parents were only shown 2 or 3 times. And I did all of those bad acts when I didn't do any of those acts. And it's just despicable. So we filed suit against Netflix. We won a very important hurdle. We won our case in Massachusetts Superior Court last year when they had a motion to dismiss. They said they had the fair report privilege. All we're doing is reporting what the government said. They went way beyond that. And so because they were on notice as well, we've now prevailed. We're now fighting Netflix. We're getting discovery. And it's going to be another year or so of fighting them. But we've got some very compelling evidence in the discovery that shows why they used me and how they abused me and my children in this process. Show the next slide. Here's an example of another thing. They claimed in their documentary it wasn't about my son. But they also then admitted in the discovery, they actually used my son's picture. This is, remember that profile, that profile I showed earlier of my son versus what was used versus what they put in at USC. They took a slice of that picture and they did just what they're accusing all the parents of doing. They photoshopped that picture. But instead of all the other parents photoshopping to make a fake kid look good, they photoshopped to make a real kid look bad. So what they had the kid on the right, that's my son, his real photo from this image. They had that photo. And what they did is they blurred it down to make him look like he wasn't a real athlete. And they put him in the movie. And they said, this wasn't about my son. They claimed to the judge that nothing to do with my son, even though it was a story where they used my name, they used USC, they used water polo, they used my son's own photo. And they photoshopped it, just what they said all the parents were doing, in a way that made him distorted the reality and distorted the truth. But instead of making him look better, they actually made him look worse on purpose. How disgusting. My poor son, who trained for a decade, whose entire life and identity was tied up with not only his good academics, but his athleticism, has been destroyed by the federal government. And now a Netflix movie that's available to 290 million families around the world, 500 million viewers, and tens of millions of people have watched this movie, and it's still out there today, and they haven't changed a single thing about it, even though I was acquitted, all the charges were overturned, except for this tax thing, and they have all the facts, and they still leave it out there today, and they call it a documentary. It's disgusting. My poor son, my heart goes out to him every time I see these pictures. Next slide, please. And this is what they did. They had my voice. Here's my voice right on the screen, right? My voice says, Singer saying, so that's Georgetown, Boston College, Georgia Tech. This one's, and then I'm talking back and forth to Singer. This is what they show. This little kid standing in the shallow end of the pool, and this body they Photoshop, they superimpose on. And this is what they had on the right-hand side. How is that a documentary? Next slide. We're also taking on a third Goliath, which is USC. And they defrauded us when we went and met with the school originally. We didn't just go and donate money to USC blindly through Singer's organization. Like any reasonable parents, Leslie and I traveled to the school. We did our homework. We did due diligence. We went and met with the coach at the school. We met with the development office at the school. And we talked about making donations. And they talked about how those donations would help our children in the admissions process. This wasn't something we did blindly. We also verified with the IRS website. We also verified with Goldman Sachs. We verified with our tax provider. And we had our son's high school coach verify with USC that my son was a talented athlete, a D1 athlete who could make the team as a redshirt his freshman year. We did all of those things. And yet USC, I'm sorry? Was there a question? Okay.
Someone just cleared their throat.
And then at USC, during my trial, they got the government to block all of the evidence that showed they did this 100 times that we wanted to share with the jury. They blocked all of that. And they said that USC's policy was to never have a donation affect admissions. We had things like USC's admissions people asking their staff to look at the Zillow listing of a house and the debt to see how much net worth there was for each applicant family, to see how much money they could donate. What's their net worth? How much can they donate? Things like that. We had people getting in who weren't athletes at all on various teams. There was a big LA Times article exposing a lot of these same case facts that we had. People who didn't even golf or had a 25 handicap joining the golf team when the father gave $3 million. And over and over and over again, there were examples at USC. And yet, because at the trial, they had to say the truth, they said under oath that this was never a factor they considered. That means that they lied to us back in 2014 when we met with them, and we met with the development office, and we met with the head coach, and we made our donations when they said this was accepted practice at USC, that donations could help in the admissions process. So we were defrauded back in 2014, but we only learned that it was a fraud in 2021 when they testified at my trial that this was not their policy. That's the first time we ever heard that. We thought at trial they would admit it because we had all this evidence that showed that they did it over 100 times. And we were just flabbergasted when the prosecutors fought every piece of that from coming in, and their handpicked judge overruled us over 100 times on that evidence. Next slide. So having won at multiple levels, it feels good on the one hand, but at the same time, my family has gone through 7 years of hell, emotional hell, financial hell, and psychological hell. I can't describe the pain as a dad to see my children suffering through this process, to have my son called a fake athlete, an alleged athlete to this day. My poor twin daughters, you see Mamie there, she's brilliant. I'm so proud of her. You know, getting a perfect test score, those kinds of things, and being called unqualified. My poor wife, Leslie, watching her cry herself to sleep almost every night for 7 years as she worried about our children. And financially, this has been devastating at every level. I've lost every job I've had. I can't be a corporate executive, a board member with a felony conviction. My consulting with McKinsey, I was a consultant at McKinsey, I was a consultant at Bain, I was a corporate C-suite executive, I was a CEO and CFO and COO of several Fortune 500 companies. Lost all those jobs, all those board roles. For 7 years at the peak of my career, I've had zero income from all those jobs. And this case, fighting this case for 7 years through the appeals process, has cost every bit of our life savings, my entire life savings, $11 million. Think about that, fighting the federal government. The federal government spent over $100 million on this case, we estimate. Cost me $11 million, and you can't even expense that on your taxes. That'll, even if you win, you can't go after them. They give themselves immunity, and you can't even expense it even if you win at trial in the appeal. It's non-tax deductible because it's a criminal act, even if you're not convicted of the criminal act. That's how devastating this can be. And the biggest question is, even if you prevail, as we have in the end, where do we go to get our reputations back? And it may be too late for me. I'm well past the peak of my career, unfortunately, but my poor children have to live with this forever. And I'll come back to one question that at the very beginning I asked, and I'll answer, how far would you go to defend your family if you were falsely accused of a crime? We could have taken the easy path at any moment. We could have pled guilty, saved the $11 million, served 2 weeks or 2 months in prison, and began to rebuild and move on with our lives. That was offered to us many times. We thought about it long and hard. It's very tempting. And for those parents who had committed bad acts, who were cheating on tests, who were bribing people, who were caught red-handed, they probably didn't really have a choice. I think some were innocent, maybe like us, who may have had a choice, but they decided not to fight. They didn't want to do that. Leslie and I thought about this long and hard, and we decided to fight for 3 reasons. First, we couldn't leave our children with that legacy. Because if I confessed to a crime, the whole reason for this crime was that people had kids who weren't qualified. You would reinforce the false narrative that the government was spinning, that these parents were going rogue, were bribing people to take tests for them, were bribing coaches to take kids who weren't athletes onto athletic teams, who were bribing administrators to accept kids in who weren't qualified for admissions, who were faking athletic profiles for kids who weren't athletes. They were doing all those things because their children weren't qualified. My children were qualified. It's hard to be more qualified than a perfect score. In fact, my daughters were more qualified than the top quartile at Harvard and at Stanford. Right? So they were very highly qualified. If I pled guilty, it would reinforce the false narrative and leave my children, our children, with a scarlet letter on their foreheads for the rest of their lives, that not only were they not qualified, would be the false narrative, but that I didn't believe in them. I thought my children were so unqualified that I had to bribe coaches and had to cheat on tests and had to do these other horrific things because I knew my kids weren't qualified. When I knew that was absolutely not the truth, and I couldn't leave our children with that stigma. And so that was the first reason we decided to fight. The second reason is that the way I grew up, I am not going to confess to anything I didn't do. It's not in my DNA. I'm a fighter from day one. I grew up in poverty, literally on welfare, and I would rather fight to my last breath and my last dollar than say something publicly, confess something publicly that I didn't do. It's just the way I am. And I would fight this, and I'll continue to fight this. And I'll continue to fight for my children and their futures. And the third reason we fought it is what the government did to us was just plain wrong. And as hard as this has been, we're some of the lucky ones. I had the grit from my upbringing. I had the resources from a successful career for 40 years. And I had the support and love of my family and our friends and our faith to fight this. Most people don't have that. Most people are in a very different set of circumstances. They can't afford to fight it. They don't have the resources. They don't have the support to fight it. And they confess to crimes they didn't commit. And we want to do whatever we can to help make sure that what happened to us never happens to anybody else in America again. What the government did to us is plain wrong, and we want to fight it to bring attention to this. That's one of the reasons I'm here in DC today, to not only look for that pardon. They were offering me the pardon. I didn't ask for it, actually, but to really help speak out against this kind of prosecutorial overreach where the prosecutors can weaponize our system of justice with almost impunity. And when they can judge shop for a judge who's highly supportive, there's no check and balance on how far they can go. And that kind of extreme abuse of our system, not politically motivated, but in this case, personally motivated by career ambitions, is despicable and needs to stop. And I'm fighting this with great risk as well. They are still threatening and can threaten us again with additional harm. And, these guys stop at nothing. They're still as vindictive as anything. They're still calling my son an alleged athlete. And so there's not an insignificant risk of repercussions. They could come after us again. and find some other crazy loophole in my tax return or whatever. And so it's not without risk that we're fighting these guys, but fighting them is the right thing to do to call attention to this kind of abuse so we can help stop it from happening to other families. Because if it can happen to me, it can happen to other families too. So that's the end of my prepared comments, and I'm happy to take questions. And you also have my beautiful wife and daughter there who can help as well.